Okay, so welcome to episode 4 of the Gratitude for Time podcast. I'm your host, Suresh. Today my guest is the former sheriff of San Joaquin County, Steve Moore. Thank you so much for your time, Steve.
Not a problem.
You know I really value it and appreciate it. I really like our conversations because we don't always agree with each other, and there's a lot of good, not arguments, but good descriptive, I guess arguments is the easiest word.
Well, you can say arguments, but what
yeah.
I see more into it is you express your point of view on a point, so do I.
Yep.
And then both of us, I can tell when we do this, we instantly start to try to analyze the other's point of view. What's good, what's bad, what can I glean from it to be able to better express what my point of view is so that you have a better understanding of what I'm saying.
Yep, that is exactly what I was trying to say. So before we kind of get into it, can you kind of give us a brief background of your history, your timeline, kind of how you got to here?
Okay. Well, I guess you would say I'm the age of the last of the baby boomers. I was born in 1955. So I was value basing from the late 50s into the early 60s. I got to see the advent of the flower children. I got to see the issues that confronted law enforcement back then, the coining of the term pig, when things were being bombed down in LA. LAPD was under great fire. There was very deep emotions over those issues. Watched the Watts riots on television. Not that I went there, okay. But I was also very fortunate to see Dr. Martin Luther King deliver his "I Have a Dream" speech.
Are you
not
serious?
in person, but on television.
Wow.
As a young man, so I got to see a lot of the major events that are now beginning to shape the things that are happening out there. Professionally, I started as a law enforcement explorer with the City of Oxnard Police Department when I was 16 years old.
Yep.
Found that I liked the work. So I continued on, became a trainee, and then a cadet, and then I finished my 2-year degree at Ventura Junior College, and then I went on to Fresno State to finish my bachelor's degree. But about that time was when Prop 13 went through, and that economically depressed so much in the way of government hires.
What was Prop 13?
Prop 13 again? Was the property tax initiative, which held property taxes down to 1%.
Okay.
The value. So that at that time, a lot of my colleagues who had been testing at other agencies were going through the academy, being handed their diploma, graduating their academy, and on the other hand, they were handed a pink slip because they were being, laid off because there was no funding to keep them. So I was fortunate enough to go back to the city of Oxnard, but in order to do that, I had to leave Fresno State before my senior year was finished. So I was lucky enough to petition the Board of Regents to allow me to finish my bachelor's degree, my senior residency requirement at Cal State LA. And at the time, my grandparents lived in Santa Anita, so I was able to drive over, because I had then great days off, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So I drove over, Tuesday morning, I went to class. I spent, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, both going to class during Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and then drove back to go back to work on graveyard next shift. So luckily, I was able to finish my bachelor's degree there. Then during that period of time, I was working for the Oxnard Police Department, got married, moved a young lady from the little town of Linden down to Southern California, and she promptly went into culture shock because she grew up on a farm.
Yeah.
She was a farmer's daughter.
Yeah.
I mean, she didn't know what miles and miles of block wall fence were and everything else.
Yeah.
So we got married, and about, I'd say close to a year later, she decided we needed to move back this way, which I did. And that was also because I knew a young man, Gary Sheridan, who was a deputy sheriff at San Joaquin County.
Okay.
And he was always telling me about how great the people were and everything else. So I figured, okay, I can transfer up here to apply. So I did. Luckily, I was picked up. Came to work in July of '82. Been with the sheriff's office in San Joaquin County until my retirement in 2019. And the last 12 years of that, I served as sheriff. I was elected to 3 4-year terms. So basically, that's my career in a nutshell.
Wow, that's a lot of time in law enforcement, and even specifically as sheriff as well. because I really think that like that perspective is super valuable, especially these days with all of the disconnection between police and public. So I guess kind of like the first question I'd like to ask is just, what is your perception of the purpose of a sheriff's department? So,
Well, my perception of the purpose on a sheriff's office is, number one, what is the legal responsibilities presented in the government code for the state of California?
okay.
On top of that, you're supposed to be able to be there for the different communities that you serve.
Yeah.
And those communities run from the lowliest person,
Yeah.
to the highest in the socioeconomic level, to the highest in the political level, to the, persons that are here, if you want to say undocumented.
Yep.
Okay?
Yep.
But they're all people.
Yep.
And each one of us in law enforcement have a duty to take care of our communities.
Yeah.
All of them. So, one, I believe that the police need to be represented in their communities.
Yep.
But at the same time, I think the communities have a responsibility to welcome.
Yep.
Okay, and by welcome, I don't mean that we've got to buy them dinner or pat them on the back or anything else. But many times I went to many public meetings throughout my career,
Yep.
and especially even as sheriff. And a lot of times they talk about, hey, why aren't you guys spending more time here in this community? Or why aren't you doing this? Why do I always see you down? Or why do I always see you over in this area? Why don't I see you over here? And I said, well, when was the last time that you called in and said, hey, send the beat car out here because I want to talk to them. I want to tell them what's going on in my community. I want to tell them what my concerns are. I want to ask them some questions about what they're doing and when they're doing it.
Yeah.
So it works both ways. Okay, then you have the standard, the sheriff is responsible to keep the peace.
Yep.
He's responsible to serve all court paperwork.
Yep.
We're supposed to be the bailiffs for the Superior Court in the state of California. And then we're to provide basic police services to the non-incorporated areas of your counties. So that pretty much covers the shall we say, the lawful side. But again, all of that has to be done intertwined with being able to fulfill those responsibilities within each community and in a manner and dialogue that they can understand.
Yep.
That you're not just there, taking people and doing things that they don't want done, but it's all part of the process.
Yeah. So I guess the way I kind of perceive things is there's a high probability population in which you're going to interact with, most likely, in terms of like, yes, you have like all kinds of different people in your county, but there's a high probability population which you're interacting with more and more than other people. Is that true or not?
Well, I don't believe it totally is. Okay, and here's the reason why. We in law enforcement, and especially in a sheriff's office, will interact with people throughout the strata, okay, and classes, if you will, or socioeconomic strata levels. But we do it on different things, okay? Whereas a businessman, okay, I may interact with you as one, being a victim, two, needing other issues, three, trying to provide advice to you through crime prevention through design by saying, hey, if you're going to put up a new building, make sure you keep the brushes low, make sure you have lights, make sure you put cameras up, make sure you do this. So we'll have interaction with you on that level. Yes, I may have more calls for service in certain areas that are quote unquote high crime, but even then a lot of the issues are much the same. And so you'll be dealing with victims, and you'll be dealing with suspects, and then you'll be dealing with basic folks that just need or want service. And then the other thing, unfortunately in today's world, law enforcement is the bastion of last resort. If you can't find it in a phone book, to find some other place to call about something, or after hours or on weekends, if you can't find any other representative government, you usually call law enforcement. And many times what you want done or we're asking about actually has nothing to do with enforcing the law. So, like I said, I don't know that we specifically spend more time with any one different area, but we do it on different areas and different levels, like others, okay? We serve civil process, so we're doing till taps, in that area. We're also serving, unfortunately, and this is another hot button issue now today, is evictions.
Evictions,
Okay, and the issues about that. So you have people being evicted, and then you have the persons that are seeking the evictions because the people are not paying their rent. and they want to be able to collect the money that's due them from the property that these people are supposed to be renting, but they're not paying. So
That
it's
falls under the jurisdiction of
yes.
law enforcement?
Well,
I
it
guess
falls
that's law,
under the
yeah.
jurisdiction of a sheriff's office because we have to serve all civil process.
Interesting. That is, I didn't realize that the eviction I realized that someone would call, but I didn't realize that was like part of like the duty to like enforce those evictions. Because is there any sort of knowledge like, okay, I've been called by someone who wants to evict somebody. This is like, I've seen their paperwork. I've seen this sort of paperwork. I know that this person is in the wrong. Or is it like the human interaction? Like, oh, I've called you. I'm saying I need this person evicted, and that's just how we're going to deal with it now. And then hindsight, we'll just...
No, it is a total court process.
Okay.
Remember, as I said, we serve all court orders or civil process, and that is adjudicated through the courts.
Okay.
So what happens is, now you can call, let's just say you have a home that you've been renting and the person's no longer paying the rent, and you've talked to them, you've tried to work out terms with them, you've offered them cash for keys, you've done all the things that you can do trying to, get them to leave your property so that you can do what you need to do with it, and they don't. So out of frustration, you call the sheriff's office and say, hey, I know you guys do evictions, I want these people evicted.
Yeah.
And then we would tell you, sir, you can't just do that.
Okay.
There is a process.
Yeah.
You will need to go through these steps, and we would strongly recommend that you retain an attorney and then go to court, get a court order.
Yeah.
So at that point, you go to court, you present your evidence, the party responding gets to present theirs if they wish, then the judge issues the order for the eviction. When they get the order, then they can come to us to serve it, and then we will go out and serve it.
Interesting. Okay. So it's a decently long process.
Well, it has become more, shall we say, time consuming.
Yeah.
At this point,
Yeah.
because unfortunately for property owners who believe, hey, they have a right to get paid for their properties, but at the same time, we want to make sure that the individuals that are staying there have the right to due process. They get a right to be heard.
Yep.
Try to work something out if they can, because nobody wants to create an additional homeless issues by evicting people if they don't have to.
Yeah. So that actually kind of, like, that's a good segue, I think, kind of to this whole current homelessness issue. Where do you see responsibility falling in terms of addressing that? Because it's so many interconnected systems that create that problem. It's not just a law enforcement, it's not just a politics, not just economics, but I feel like law enforcement gets caught up in that because they're the ones having to go out and deal with them, and even expanded. I feel like I see a lot of officers having to like literally deal with homeless people, even by the river and everything. So where do you like see that?
Well, homelessness in and of itself is a product of everything. Our environment,
Yep.
our economy, our socioeconomic stratus, our individuals that are homeless themselves.
Yeah.
There are many individuals who
health.
choose to be homeless because they don't want to go to shelters. They don't want to go other places. They choose to live that lifestyle. And I can remember as a young boy, they were called hobos.
Yep.
I mean, they were people that kind of moved from place to place
Yep.
and kind of stayed to themselves. And nobody really paid too much attention to them because they weren't as many, or at least they weren't as visible.
Yeah.
Today, they're very visible. And law enforcement, again, because as I said before, if you can't get something else handled, the place you call
Yep.
is law enforcement. And so now law enforcement gets called because of concerns over trash, pollution,
Yep.
of our environment, other things that are going on. So when we go out there, we try to talk to these folks, but we also now try to bring in services with us.
Yep.
Human Services Agency, the
Yep.
Veterans Administration people. So if there's veterans that are homeless that have the availability to get benefits, that they can take advantage of it and get them into programs. At this point, when you say responsibility for it, it's government's responsibility. It's our, shall we say, church's responsibilities, okay? It's our societies like the Salvation Army and others that are trying to help those people. Their responsibilities because they've taken on all those things. But it needs to be a more coordinated response. And that's the hardest thing to do, is to get all the parties that are involved and want to be involved in it to work on the problem as a common goal and try to make sure that nobody's duplicating services so that funds aren't being wasted.
Yep.
Okay. And yet there is a coordinated effort in getting things to them. They need, housing, they need food, they need medical care. And then the other issues, they need treatment.
Yep.
Many of the homeless, as I'm sure you're aware of, have drug and alcohol abuse programs, have mental health issues.
Yep.
And so they're not going to get any better unless they have access to treatment and quality treatment.
Yeah, and get that treatment.
Understanding that they do need to take their medications and they do need to participate.
Yep.
So it is a hairy issue. But going back to specifically law enforcement, I believe you've seen that the courts have now held that the police cannot be, taking people into custody just for being homeless, because homeless in and of itself is not a crime.
Yep.
They
That's true.
are now saying in the last court decision, indicated that you can't be moving people unless you have a place to take them that is going to be able to provide them. And that was the Ninth Circuit Court. Says you can't just say, okay, you're in a public place. Well, it's a public place. Well, if you're in a public place, you have a right to be there. Okay, and I can't just say, okay, I'm going to take you to the city limits or the edge of the county and turn you loose.
Yeah.
Okay, because that's not appropriate.
Yeah.
Okay, and that if I can't take you to some place, that provides you with some services to be able to help you get out of this situation, that right now we're being told to leave it alone and just try to monitor as much as we can. Now, doesn't mean that we tolerate crime by those
No.
folks. That, if they commit crimes, they get arrested just like anybody else, and they get adjudicated through the courts just the same way. And great things have been happening here lately. A lot of the district attorneys are attempting to provide enforcement, through prosecutions, but with an eye towards rehabilitation and towards getting them into programs that maybe they wouldn't go into otherwise.
Yeah, because that kind of quickly gets back into like overcrowding of jails, and then like I think we've talked about AB 109, where it's like we're trying to get people out of the jails now because it's too overcrowded. So I think it's a funny little cycle where I think our systems haven't really figured out a way to get these people that are either mentally unhealthy, bad habits, whatever it is, out of that like cycle where they're just not like prison, homelessness, prison, jail, like always kind of not really a chance to get out and I guess live a normal life as we would call it.
I think you're right, but it goes back to, I think, one of the basic premises is that, each individual is responsible for themselves. And I think the hardest thing for an individual to do at any point in time is to reach out and say, I need help.
Yep.
Okay? I think that's a very tough thing to do for anybody.
Yeah.
And with the homeless and people with those kind of issues, I think it's even more difficult because, unfortunately, they know that sometimes when they do try to reach out, the reactions are not what they expect and not what they want. And so it makes it even more difficult. So if that happens several times, then you want to quit asking for help.
Yep.
And so what help and resources are available go unused because they won't participate.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, that is a really, even for a like person who's well embedded in society, has a good support, it's hard for them to ask for help.
Absolutely.
And it's almost impossible to ask someone, a homeless person or someone in that situation, to like cognitively be able to be self-aware enough to know that there's something wrong and then have the courage to also ask. I think that's damn near impossible. But I think it also plays onto the side of the officers who are the ones dealing with this issue, because it's super easy to overlook that mental health aspect of where they're seeing things that are not necessarily pleasant on a day-to-day basis. And this is kind of the area where I'm concerned with, is like officer mental health and suicide rate. So I mean, like, I'm sure you're aware, but like in general, I think the officers are expected to die from suicide more than in line of duty, So like and that's more of a recent phenomenon I've come to gather in the last like maybe 60 years or so. It's been increasing, where it wasn't so, I guess, back in the day. And I only got that information from an older officer. He's retired, obviously, but he was like 90. I asked him about it, and he said he didn't understand why people were like taking their own life, and that suicide was so high. Like he just couldn't understand it because when he was an officer, it wasn't the case. So where do you think that change has occurred, or why that is more so now?
I believe it's education. I believe that we as a society, okay, each generation learns faster, learns quicker, more, has a greater breadth of knowledge available to them. When you look today, okay, we talk on a global scale all the time.
Yeah.
And we don't talk about just what's happening in my little town or even my county kind of thing. We talk in global terms.
Yeah.
We talk about, the
Wuhan,
recent
China.
the recent COVID-19 virus. Where did it
Yeah.
come from? It came from China.
Yeah.
Okay. And what did they do as a response? They meaning governments, and rightfully so. They chose to close down certain venues coming in, certain modes of travel, because they didn't want to continue to import the virus if they thought they could curtail it.
Yep.
So doing things of that nature. So I believe that it's because of that education level, the fact that it's a greater global, and Suresh, as you know, that can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
When you start to see things on a more global scale, it's like, my gosh, we're never going to be able to get a handle on this thing. And it's just going to take its toll, and it's going to cause major changes, and it's going to do other things. And at that point, sometimes it's like, I don't have personally the resources to deal with it.
Yep.
And I can't totally fathom how to, provide for these things.
Yeah.
And then, as you say, if you have an officer who ends up having to deal with people on a regular basis that are not necessarily willing to work with them, or want to take a negative attitude, I mean, it's tough, and it gets more difficult. And so it becomes more of a process of, geez, what am I supposed to do? And then that leads to a feeling of hopelessness, which then leads you to depression, which then leads you to other issues. And I don't think anybody today is immune from, at different times, feeling, shall we say, low, or things are not going real well.
Yeah.
Maybe I need to find something else to do.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think that it becomes a very quickly exponential flywheel of lack of self-confidence, lack of self-belief. No, okay, now I'm depressed. Now there are other suicidal thoughts, and then suicidal action. I think it becomes so easy to be overlooked on the officer side because they're the ones technically with power. That's kind of how I perceive it, is they're overlooked because they're the ones with power.
Well, it's not just that they're okay. When you say power, yes, they do have power, but the power they have is the power that the people give them. Okay, and what that is that you look to law enforcement for solutions. You have a problem.
Yep.
Where do you go? You don't call the post office. Okay, you don't call your local tax guy.
Yeah.
If you got an issue that's happening right
don't
now,
even call the
you call law
firefighters.
enforcement
Yeah.
right away, or the fire department.
No, I think most people call 911 first,
Right.
and then.
But what I'm saying is that they expect law enforcement to go out there and solve an issue.
Yeah.
Okay, and the officer, when he gets there, he feels, hey, they sent me here, they trained me, they gave me all these tools to do this thing, so I should be able to go out there and solve the problem. Okay, and when they're not able to do so, it's kind of like, geez, this isn't working like it's supposed to. I mean, why is it not? I mean, they said in the academy we were going to be able to, take care of these things. We were going to be able to get the resources. We were able to do the things that needed to be done. And now I'm finding I'm not able to do that. Or when I do try to do it, I'm being told I'm doing it wrong. Or I'm not sure about what my next step is, or how do I get these things. Okay.
Yeah.
And again, that can be overwhelming. And so the officer can start to feel like, hey, why do I even bother? Why am I doing this?
Yeah. There's a lot of, would you say, pressure from the system itself, just being an officer in a police system?
Well, there is the pressure in the system because calls have to be answered.
Yep.
Things need to be taken care of.
Yep.
But at the same time, I believe a lot of it is what the individual officer perceives as his role or her role in the organization, and how they see what they should be doing, and how they see they should be supporting the agency in order to meet its goals.
That also makes sense. It's kind of an interesting question here. You mentioned having been there, not in person, but for Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech. So how would you perceive kind of the whole issue today, where I mean, that's a continuation of it, obviously. But how do you see between like the black community and like the interaction with police, and just given the fact that you've kind of seen a lot of that history?
Well, the one thing that they're trying to address right now is systemic racism. Okay, and that is a rather large term, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It covers quite a gamut of things. What I do know is that as sheriff, I made it a point to attend the NAACP meetings, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People's meetings. And I went there with an open mind, and I went there with the option of being able to represent my office there so that I could answer questions ahead of time. Plus, I wanted to make sure that that community knew that I was there and available to them.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And I think that's where it begins. I believe if we start working directly with the representatives, okay, and not just, I mean, let's face it, everybody likes to deal with people that are pleasant, okay, but you unfortunately have to deal with people that are unpleasant, who have, some very different points of view, and some of them very pointed points of view about what's going on and what you're doing. But I believe that if we can open dialogue, I believe if we can start showing the respect for each other, saying, okay, I'm going to come to you and we're going to discuss issues. I'm going to tell you what I'm seeing. You're going to tell me what you're seeing. And then maybe then we can start forging a common ground. Now, education helps. I mean, refocus at the level of entry when you're becoming a police officer going through the academy. Again, in today's world, most of our young police officers being hired, many of them lived at home until such time as they got hired on the police department. They don't have a greater amount of life experience. So again, because of what they've experienced is a little more limited, they don't have the exposure. Even though, as we spoke of earlier, that we think globally, we can think globally, and we do, but when you talk about what experiences each individual has, and as you know, it's the individual experience that sets your value base. Okay? So, as I said, I'm a child from the baby boomers, the last of those. So, my value base was based in that time frame and the things that were important then. Now, some have changed over years because things change and time changes. Okay?
Gotta adapt.
But it's all part and parcel to that. And as long as we can then readjust our values based on our interactions with the members of the other communities, that helps. Because now I can better understand what you're doing. You can better understand why I'm doing what I'm doing. And then we can at least come to a mutual understanding of the roles that we're going to play as far as in the community. But when you boil it down, I've seen, the black community, I've seen the Hispanic community, the Hmong community, other members of the Asian communities. But when you boil it all down, all those communities all want the same things. They want to be left alone to be peaceable. They want to raise their children. They want to give them opportunities. They want to make sure they get a good education. And they want to be able to provide the things in life that they either didn't have, or that they feel they should have. So as long as we allow each other the respect that pretty much we all want the same thing, and if we can work together on those common goals, we're going to be better off.
I think our current district attorney, Anne Marie Schubert, has a quote where it's like, I work with a lot of different stakeholders, but I've learned over the years, she said, everyone wants a safer environment. So I think that kind of goes right in there. I think that's, How would you actually, this is actually one of the questions I wanted to ask, is how do you stimulate that interaction and that expressing of feelings and views between police and public? You mentioned one, just going there. How can this side, how can the public come to the law enforcement and kind of bridge that gap?
Okay. By inviting representatives of the department, and I'm not just talking the sheriff or the chief or the assistant chief, but talking about inviting the actual deputies or police officers that work the beat to attend certain functions. Okay. As you know, each community has a culture. Okay. And within each culture, there are different observances of special holidays. Special days that have a whole ritual involved with them. Okay.
You have a story with the You want to tell that?
I'll get there. But I mean, well, the point is that if that community were to reach out
Yep.
and say, hey, I would like to have the beat car come down and spend, the afternoon with us because of an observance that we're doing. Okay. And as I told you as sheriff, I attended the NAACP meetings, but I also attended a lot of the Sikh temple meetings.
Yep.
Okay. A lot of the different Sikh temple observances. And as you know, at the Sikh temple, while it's open to all,
Yep.
there are some requirements. One, you do not wear your shoes in the temple.
Yep.
And two, you have to have your head covered.
Yeah.
Okay. And at the beginning, to comply with those rules, they just had you take your shoes off.
Yep.
Okay. And then they gave you a triangular piece of cloth, usually yellow or orange. And then you tied it on your head. And then you went in and represented, spoke, interacted with people. And almost all of that revolved around food.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Because that's another common bond between everybody.
Yep.
We all eat.
Food.
We all love to eat.
Yep.
So we do that. So after a couple of these times, and the piece of cloth sometimes was a little longer, sometimes a little shorter. Sometimes in order to get on, they had to tie it pretty tight, so it was kind of uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So at one of the meetings, I asked one of the elders at the temple if it would not be against any cultural rules if I wore a turban. And they looked at me like, you'd wear a turban? And I said, yeah. I said, it looks fairly comfortable other than this. And they said, oh, yeah, it's not uncomfortable. And I said, okay. So the next time they invited me out, the gentleman said, well, you said you wanted to wear a turban. I said, yeah. I said, well, come a little early and we'll do this. So I went in and they took me off to the side. And gentleman comes in and he has this long bolt of cloth. Okay. And he starts talking about it and he wets it down and everything else. And, and then he starts with a smaller piece that he put on my head. And then he started tying the other one, wrapping it around. And they got it all on there. And it looked kind of interesting from that standpoint. And then several different times I went to those meetings or functions and wore a turban. And they never asked for it back, so I wore it home.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the incident we spoke of is it was just kind of interesting. I was dressed in a suit, in a tie, similar to what I got on now.
Yeah.
But I had, a turban on, and I went into a local store.
Yeah.
And I couldn't find the paintbrushes I was looking for because I was not looking for the standard paint, looking for the small model kind. And so I walked up to a gentleman behind the counter and I asked him, I says, where do I find the paintbrushes? And he looked at me a little stunned to begin with, because I'm sure he's saying, okay, as you know, I'm a little dark complected, all right? And I now have a turban on, and the voice and the diction that came out of my mouth was not what he was expecting, at least in my opinion.
Yeah. No, I'm sure.
And so at that point, then, okay, and kind of got it, and he says, go this. Well, that is part and parcel to what they say is now implicit bias.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yep.
Now, did I feel that the gentleman in that store was a negative bias? No. I just took it that, unfortunately, or based on his experiences, he had not had anybody else that wore a turban that didn't have what he expected the diction or the voice quality to be. So now he's aware that somebody can wear a turban and have a different diction or voice quality. So you go on from there.
Yeah. I think that, as funny as it is, but I think that really does capture a lot of the issues that we see with people, not even just with law enforcement, is just, it's not, I don't think it's a problem to immediately have a first reaction of somebody. I think that's human. You do that out of survival. But I think where we lack is giving it the space, maybe 2 seconds, 3 seconds to kind of verify if that is warranted, if that initial reaction is warranted. Because not every tall, dark, black guy walking down the street is he's just a dude. He's 9 times out of 10, he's just a dude. He's just trying to be himself. But given with movies, given our culture, given how people portray things in media, blah, blah, for that first initial reaction will come for a lot of people. Oh my God, I'm scared. Do I need to cross the street or not? But I think if you are able to give it the little bit of space where it's like, okay, I may have had that reaction. Is it true? And I think that part, that little space, isn't really given to a lot of people, or people don't know how to give that to themselves, and so they just have this reaction and they act on it. Do you think that's like...
Well, you're correct. And being able to listen to what the interaction began, make a quick assessment of, what is actually before me, and then respond in kind to that, versus just saying, oh my gosh, this is that, and, why this or why that.
That actually, now I'm thinking, so it brings up an interesting point in law enforcement where if you're an officer, you've now responded to something, you've now seen somebody, you've made your initial reaction of like thought, okay, this is what it could be based on my experiences, blah, blah. And there's actually an opportunity cost to giving space. Like, say you've made your initial reaction. If you give 2 seconds, 3 seconds of that, okay, is it true? In some cases, that could be it for you,
Well, you're talking about the split-second decisions that officers have to make in what can be life-threatening, either to themselves or to the public that they serve in doing that. And in those cases, yes, you do have to make some definite decisions. And many of them are going to be snap decisions. But how you approach a call, how you approach what's being put in front of you also makes a big difference. If you get a call of a disturbance, and so when you get there, you're thinking, okay, it's a disturbance, it's a fight, who's fighting, what's going on? Well, when you get on there, you're now kind of amped up, ready to go, go do this thing, right? Well, then you find out it's merely a dispute between two little kids in the neighborhood, which had nothing to do with anything else you were thinking of before you got there. Okay, so what you need to do is, okay, where am I going? What neighborhood is it? Where is it? What other calls have I had in this area? Okay, okay, so, and now today, fortunately, because most agencies have the mobile digital computers, or MDTs, mobile digital terminals, in each car, so you're getting a whole lot more data coming in on the call.
Yeah.
You're getting, the person
To
who called,
supplement.
you're getting a phone number and text and information, usually a whole lot more than you would get on a radio call in the old days where you just said, hey, contact so-and-so at such and such an address about a burglary. Well, okay, do you have a little burglary? Do you have a big burglary? Do you have a burglary? Because as you know, burglary has a very specific definition under the law. Okay, it could be that it wasn't a burglary at all, it was a theft versus a burglary. So just different things that you have to look at. And so today's world, police officers start to look at what they have, what's going on. But at any point in time, any person who perceives a direct threat to their life, they're going to have to react in one form or another.
Yep.
And if they have the ability to defend themselves, they are going to do so. And that's something that has to be dealt with.
Yeah.
The other is that, back at the beginning of my career, most folks, if you told them to, sit down, relax for a moment, let me talk to this, let me do this, people would follow through with it.
Yeah.
Okay. Unfortunately, today, a lot of people don't, and they start with, well, I know my rights, and you can't do this, you can't do that. Well, I'm not trying to violate your rights. What I'm trying to do is get you to diffuse for a little bit while I go find out what's happening over here, so then I can come back and work with you. So it's a little more difficult.
Yeah.
Okay. And unfortunately, I mean, no one wants to see anybody's rights, taken away from anybody, or anybody be
violated.
disenfranchised. But at the same time, you're going to have to allow the officer some leeway in doing his job to be able to get things together and do things. But I mean, it's just like I've been to many communities where members of the community said, well, we're afraid of the police. And I said, well, did you ever stop to think that the police might be afraid of you? Okay, when they're going to a call and where they're at, based on how they've been treated, by the community in the past.
Yeah.
Instead of somebody saying, yeah, I know that guy, Officer so-and-so. Yeah, come on over here, I'll tell you what's going on.
Yeah, that's actually something that the previous interview I did with Dr. Zimbardo, he's a psychologist. He has done a lot of work with like prisons and prison guards, and he actually said, when I talk to a lot of those prison guards, they're doing the things that they do out of fear. They're scared for their own life. If they don't like actually control and exercise power over those inmates that they have. Like, they fear that their own life will be taken. So that was kind of the perspective that he had, and I think carries over a little bit. Whereas, like you said, everyone's a person, everyone's a human, and I think that the feeling of fear goes both ways, which sucks, because what it does to your brain, literally, in those states of fear, especially if it's a chronic state, it makes it so hard to do the right thing and to stay calm and to not initially just react. So I think both sides are really, at this moment, put in bad situations, and then asked to make gold out of nothing, you know? Yeah, so that's kind of my perception, is really the officer's not in a great situation, especially given that he has to know, like, all the laws that he's supposed to, like, have with him, you know, and then know exactly which law applies when and where. And then this side, where the public is not trained for mental health, there's a lot of, like, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, all of this, economic issue, political issues. They're not in good situations. And then they're just clashing, you know, and then you have the whole social media aspect of, like, one incident will get blown up, and then a lot of attention's paid to it, and then the 10 good incidents are not really paid any attention to. So yeah, how do you think the smartphone has changed law enforcement?
Well, it's changed law enforcement from the standpoint that everybody now needs to be aware that, you know, there's going to be video.
Yeah.
There is going to be audio. Actions that you're taking. You know, they're going to take photographs or video of it, and it's going to be played. And unfortunately, depending upon who's playing it, only the portion that supports a certain point of view gets played.
Yep. Of course.
Versus the entirety.
Yep.
Okay. And then, like anything else, you know, you need to look at the full context of the situation. Do we have to use force at different times? Yes. I mean, it is required to be able to take people into custody, to stop threats, to do other things. Okay. But the question then becomes is how much is necessary?
Yeah.
And we train, you know, police officers are trained to recognize the threat. They're trained to take whatever steps they need to, but only that amount of force necessary to overcome the resistance. But again, I mean, it's a varying degrees on a lot of that. It gets more difficult today because people are starting to say, hey, there's been too many abuses in the past. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that there haven't been abuses.
Yeah.
Okay? I mean, I'm sure there has been over time, and we continue to do the best we can to eliminate those and remove people from those situations that do, you know, take advantage of situations, that use too much force, that do things they're not supposed to do. But again, you have to be able to understand that just because other abuses have happened doesn't mean that this contact you're about to have is going to result in that.
Yeah. Okay, so how, say if you were president or something, or if you were...
I don't think that's a job I would like at this point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you had the power, I guess, to influence the future of law enforcement and public interaction, that relationship, how would you go about not just mending it, but creating a more fruitful relationship between those two entities, where officers aren't, like, just killing themselves because their job and the meaning of it hasn't been eroded, and then over here people feel like their environments are safe and that there's peace of mind. So how would you kind of, given everything today, our context moving forward, how would you kind of influence that mending and building and growing of a relationship?
Well, yeah, that's a plate full in and of itself.
Yeah.
Okay. There are some things that I believe would help advance that process. I don't think there's any one set of things that's going to say, a recipe to say, hey, if you do this and add this and do that, that's going to, you know, end up in this solution.
Or what do you see as an obstacle, maybe?
Well,
or obstacles?
I'll tell you right now, one of the biggest obstacles, and it's been there for as long as I can remember, is when does a law enforcement agency actually, represent in its own numbers, reflect the numbers in the society it serves. In other words, how many black officers do you have? How many Hispanic officers do you have?
Smart.
How many female officers do you have?
Okay.
How many of each of the different individual groups that are out there that
So that
deal with
it
law
literally
enforcement?
represents the community.
Exactly, because that's what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, yeah.
Law enforcement is supposed to represent, the community it serves by having those people.
That
But
actually seems like a pretty
unfortunately,
good.
one, it's difficult to do, okay? And in some cultures, the career of a police officer is not looked upon as a goal
Yeah.
or a positive culture,
Yeah.
or
No,
environment.
I don't think my dad would have been all that happy if I mean, he wasn't happy with me not becoming not an investment banker, doctor, or lawyer. Like those are all he saw, really. So if I would have been a police officer, it would not have been.
So
I would have been shocked.
I think we need to try to get the different communities to start looking at the law enforcement profession as something they would want their children to go into, so that they could better represent the communities that they serve,
Yep.
and provide that cultural understanding that is difficult to learn if you don't have the interaction.
Yeah.
Okay. When you deal with different people, okay, especially when you deal with peoples of different cultures, and especially those that still have very deep roots in their culture. As time goes on, most immigrants to the United States, from what my observation has been, we all tend to become assimilated into the melting pot of America. While we still have different cultural beliefs and different ideas, pretty much we kind of homogenize to a great degree. Whereas certain cultures, because they are markedly different and have different ideals, keep those cultural roots longer. So it's harder. Okay. So therefore, how can I understand where this member of my community feels about certain issues, or looks upon certain things, or chooses to interpret the actions of someone else who may not have a negative thought or intent at the onset, but is perceived that way because of what the culture is. So the only way I can see that happening, okay, is that we get more representation in law enforcement from all these communities.
Yeah.
As I said, a focus from those communities that being in law enforcement is a positive career within their community.
Yep.
Then at the same time, we need to make sure that we provide the appropriate level of training to all the officers on cultural sensitivity.
Yep.
And I'm not talking about the touchy-feely, kind of stuff. I'm talking about being able to start to recognize issues, okay?
Yep.
When one of the ones I learned with the Indian and Sikh community specifically is you see many of them wearing the metal bracelets, okay? And it's usually worn on the right hand.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are going to wonder, what's that about? Well, if you take the time to look, and there are many publications on it, and many of the own communities have information that explain that the bracelet is worn and it's made of iron because it's not meant to be a declaration. It's meant to provide a reminder to the wearer that you need to do the right thing.
Huh.
That's what it's for.
Wow.
Okay? And that's what it initially was for. Okay? And so if you see someone wearing that, you can, yes, it comes from that culture, but then you should be able to recognize that this person has taken that commitment to try to do the right thing through his culture. Okay? And other things, when you talk to people and you look at things and the different representations, especially the things that are very culturally important to each of the different cultures. As long as you can recognize some of those basic tenements that are very important, that makes it easier for you to interact with them. Like when you go to, as I just said, to the Sikh temple, and if you're going to go in to investigate a crime, take your shoes off.
Yeah.
Okay. Now that's a monumental undertaking for cops.
Yeah.
Okay, because normally, you're wearing heavier shoes, you're
Yeah.
wearing boots, or you're wearing, but if you can do that, it's going to make it easier for them to accept you being there and being able to talk to you.
It builds trust.
It's the same way with, you go to a mosque. You don't enter into the main part of a mosque with your shoes.
Yeah.
Okay? And you're supposed to wash before you do, and same with
Yeah.
Sikh temples and others. So, getting that type of information out to trainees when they're young trainees starting to learn the business, that this is how you're going to have to conduct yourselves in order to help gain confidence within the communities and address issues. And so it makes a big difference. The other thing that is sometimes very hard to focus on, and that is today's suspect can be tomorrow's victim. So while today this person may have, been involved in a theft or a burglary, but tomorrow that may be the person that you're now trying to keep alive who's been shot on the street. Okay? And the things that you try to do. So it's sometimes the shifting of that gear between, like I said.
I just saw you yesterday doing something. Now I'm having to one protect you, even though literally yesterday I saw you committing a crime and was the one. Okay.
There you go.
That does, especially I think because people are like processed, they go to jail, but then they're released, and then they're back on the street again, right? So that issue does probably come up a decent amount, I would imagine.
It definitely can.
Okay. I had one more. I have two more.
Okay.
The last one is about, okay, here's a good one. How does a police officer know he's a good police officer?
Personally, it is being able to solve your cases. Okay? Taking pride in the fact that I was able to go out, investigate the call, do the things that were necessary so that either I could solve it, okay, or that I could provide the appropriate amount of information for a detective to follow up later on to solve it if it's a longer and more involved case. Fortunately for my experience, and especially in San Joaquin County, we have always prided ourselves in the fact that our line level officers were expected to be investigators also. That it's not just take the basic report, check the boxes, and send it upstairs to a detective. We expected them to go out and make contacts with the neighbors, talk to people, go see if there's video from the surrounding area, see what other evidence you can gain, have our tech services people come out, look for other clues and doing other things. So that's one. The other is how you're accepted in your community. Do people talk to you? Okay? If you're doing well in the community knows which cops they can talk to and which cops they can't, or who's harder to deal with. But if your members of your community are willing to talk to you about, hey, you might want to go check this out, or you might want to go there. I mean, no one wants to, worry. They don't want to have to be worried about somebody, focusing on them because they talk to the police. But at the same time, they can generally say, hey, you might want to go watch, for this kind of activity in that area. Yeah. They're not saying who's specifically doing it, but they're giving you clues. Yeah. That's another area.
Well, they're most familiar
with
The
other is that, for part of it is your peers, okay? I mean, the people that you work with, okay, and the people that you respect, as being good investigators, is being able to solve issues and do things, okay? You picked up those traits from them, and then that means that they'll want to work with you. They'll say, hey, if I got a detail going on, or I'm going to go do a special operation somewhere, they say, hey, Suresh, we want you to come on out and work with us tonight. Okay? That tells you that your peers are saying, hey, you're a good cop. I want you on my team because I want to be successful. And so when you're included in doing those things. The other is that, as you know, there are awards for valor, there are awards for others, and all those things also help show that, you're being recognized either by your communities or by your peers, okay? But being able to say, hey, every day when I get up, it's a new day, I'm going to go out and do my best, and being able to say, hey, it works. And I was able to, make things right when I can. You don't always get that opportunity, but you try.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we'll shift gears here, kind of humanize it a little bit more. So this podcast is called A Gratitude for Time. And the purpose of it is to talk with people of like either power, wealth, or influence about how they value time. So I've asked everyone so far, and I'm going to ask you too, how do you value time?
Well, that's an interesting point of view, okay? Sometimes, it's kind of strange. Sometimes time is very valuable to me, okay? I planned to come here, okay? But in doing so, I planned the trip, okay? I had a set of cartridges, ink toner cartridges that need to be returned to UPS to go back. So I planned my trip so that I would, drop those off, Then I would stop at the dry cleaners and pick up my dry cleaning. Then I was moving from there to stop at get a bite to eat, then move on to a friend of mine's home that I had made some equipment for a raffle that they're doing for their fundraisers for one of their organizations, and then to be able to come here. Okay, so I'm looking at my time frames and what I've got going. Well, I'm trying to get out of the house, and it takes a little bit longer, like always does,
Yep.
even though you try. So I get to the first place. Well, I'm thinking ahead. Because again, my time is valuable. I know I've got so many hours to do this.
Yep.
So I then go, okay, I'll call the UPS store or a UPS outlet there on Broadway.
Yep.
Well, it's closed today.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, so now my first stop's off the list.
Yeah.
So I head on to the dry cleaners, in downtown, Midtown Stockton, or North Stockton actually. But I go there, and I know that there is a one of those mail centers next to it. So when I stopped and got my dry cleaning, I asked the lady there, says, "Is that a UPS pickup spot?" She goes, "Oh yeah." So I pulled out, got out, was able to take my box in, get that done, and then I walked down to a little local hot dog stand there, and figured, okay, I'll get a hot dog for my lunch kind of thing,
Yeah.
and I can eat it on the road. So I get in, and we were all socially distancing, and we were in a mask, but the two people in front of me, obviously, this is the first time they've been in the restaurant, and it's this little space. So I'm now, okay, remember I said, I'm a little behind here. I'm trying to make sure I get there and make sure I get here on time.
Yeah.
And they're going, well, geez, what's in the cheese dog? What's in the chili cheese dog? Or what's in the kraut dog? Or what's in this? Well, how good is that? Well, how much is that? Is it a lot to eat? And I'm going, all I want to do is get a simple hot dog and go. So at that point, my time is extremely valuable because right now I'm looking at, hey,
come on, people.
I know this is Saturday and I know you're having, it's an easy time for you, but I got things I want to do.
Yeah.
So at that moment, my time was very important to me and very valuable to me. Okay. And then, moving on to the next phase and doing stuff and talking, at times it can be less. I mean, you invest time at different points, whether it's work, okay, or whether it's recreation. And whether it's working with community organizations or serving on different boards. Okay, so time in and of itself has so many different values based on where it's applied. Okay, and then if you start to think, and like I was explaining earlier, that today we were watching our granddaughter because my son and daughter-in-law are working, and I look at her and think, wow, it's got her whole life ahead of her. I mean, all the things that are on there. And I'm thinking, geez, if I'm lucky, I might have 20 years left.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think, boy, what a waste. I should have done more with my time. But then you just start to turn around and think, okay, look back at what you have accomplished and what you've done, with your time.
Yeah.
And so it at varying points, I think it's like different currencies or like gold. Gold is a very precious metal and a commodity that we value.
Yep.
Okay. So at different times the price is higher, and at different times the price is lower.
Yeah.
So to me, the value on time changes depending upon where it's being invested and how it's being used, and what's going on. So I mean, for me, you look at all of it. Is it important to be as industrious as you can with the time that you have? Yes. But to me, industrious means it can be meaning that, hey, so I'm going to take the morning and I'm going to sit down and read a book.
Yep.
I mean, that expenditure time doing that is a recreation for me. But yet at the same time, it's important to me to be able to do that.
Yep.
Okay. And then the other places, I get up every morning and I run 45 minutes on my Stairmaster every morning.
Wow.
Religiously to do so, because I know if I stop, I won't go back to it. So as long as I stay on it.
Yeah.
So the 45 minutes I invest every morning to do that. Could I do something else? Yes, but I think that affords me the ability to stay as mobile as I can as I do get older. And the old saying, snap, crackle, and pop was a cereal I used to eat, and now it's the noises I make when I get out of bed in the morning. Same kind of thing. So the more I can do to kind of keep myself available, then it means I can better enjoy the time I have left with greater quality. And then being able to spend time with my grown children and then my grandchildren as they come along and be able to do those things. I think those are wonderful.
Yeah. No, I think there's a lot of wisdom in there, especially about the time having a different value based on the context and the whole kind of balancing act you're describing, you know, whether it be, and the way I kind of just perceive that balancing act is past, present, and future, and where you are in those time frames, and the ability to get the most out of each one, you know, like you said, you may look at your future and like, okay, well, there may not be much of it left, or like, again, the guy I interviewed just Thursday, he's 88. So he's like, well, I don't know if I have another year or two left. Like, it's always a mystery to me, kind of thing. But then if you're able to look back, that can be incredibly meaningful to like what you've been able to do, the amount of people you've been able to help. And so I think that's everything you just said was super wise. I think that's the best word, wisdom. It was just a lot of wisdom. And so, yeah, I want to thank you for your time. I love our conversations. I really do think I learn the most from our conversations than pretty much anyone else. So I really thank you for your time today, and that you shared it with everyone else as well. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.